You can tell a lot about what a people believe about human nature by looking at the rituals they use to welcome children into the world. It would be wonderful to compare all of them across religion and culture. Do these small people come to us as part of a sinful species, as is suggested by some of the language of the Orthodox Christian rites of baptism? Or do they come as pure souls for whom we give thanks and pledge to do our best by? Or do they come just as totally blank slates to be imprinted upon by us, poor things? There is a Buddhist koan that goes, "Show me the face you had before you were born. Show me the face you had before you were born." That's such an interesting and personal way to think about how we come into this world with a unique pre-existing stamp, a face already. But is that stamp inherently sinful or is it inherently pure? Religions have always struggled to understand human predisposition, and they have made up sacred stories that explain them. Adam and Eve, the parents of the fall from grace and the expulsion from paradise, are the mom and dad of the central or the predominant story of the Western world. And I remember writing a paper in college for a literature professor about what a terrible setup it was to put that tree there and the garden and then the apple, boy. And so I remember later when I saw the bumper sticker, Eve was framed, I thought, oh wow, I wasn't such an original thinker myself, and it was a wonderful thought. She was framed. But of course, scientific research is shedding a huge amount of light on what makes individuals the way they are. Some of what has traditionally been attributed to demons or evil is actually neurological difference or neurological damage. But so much of how the human moral character gets formed remains a mystery. When we say at the beginning of our act of dedication, every child born is one more redeemer, that's an aspirational statement. It's a statement of possibility. It's not a job description. We know that not every human being will leave a legacy of honor and respect. So we say this hopefully. We say this as a kind of a guidance. But here's something. Universalists and Unitarians were critiqued and ridiculed for centuries by Orthodox Christianity because we emphatically affirmed that human beings are born loved and lovable, possessed of what classical theology in our tradition called a likeness to God that irresistibly connects each one of us, each human being, to the divine in an intimate way that our forefathers and foremothers who wrote classical theology described in terms of parental love. It's a limited metaphor to speak of that unspeakable grandeur of the divine as mother or father or parent, but it was the best metaphor they could come up with, and so they used it. And there was good reason to do so. When Jesus spoke of God as Father, Abba, Daddy, he was stepping out of his Jewish tradition that tended to use much grander and mysterious language to address the Almighty. They used words like Lord and Sovereign and simply Hashem, or the name, because God's name was unspeakable, and God entirely other. The Universalists were particularly hardcore about insisting that the essential relationship between the source of all life and each life was love. It made a lot of people upset that they said this because those other folks really worried that without the constant threat and specter of a judging Lord around, folks are going to get too wild and free and depraved. But no, the Universalists always said, the work of our lifetimes is not to respond to fear, but to live into the love which is our birthright. And I want you to sit and think about that sometime. Think about being loved just for being. And just take that in sometime. It's a radical thing. I don't think that's an easy thing to take in. Unconditional, irresistible love. So, see how it feels to you sometime when you have a moment. See what you feel about that unearned grace. We are taught all our lives to perform for love, to earn it, to conditionally receive it. And in human relationships, that almost never happens. We try. But that pure love that we rest in and are born into, feel that out sometime. William Wordsworth was a British poet of the Romantic era, which means he was being read by Emerson and other members of Emerson's gang who are so important to our spiritual tradition. In this poem called Intimations of Immortality, Wordsworth wrote about the origins of each human soul. And I want you to listen here how he's making a faith claim. Just see if you can pick it out of the poetry here. He writes, "Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home." The poem goes on to say that prison begins to close around us in our infancy. In other words, we're born in this pureness, but our corruption starts very young, when our minds and our natural wisdom get messed with by family, society, religion, schools. I know, right? You can see the argument about original sin or original blessing going on today in discussions about terrorists or serial killers or history's worst and most depraved characters or the person who made the headlines just yesterday, because there's always someone. The debate has never stopped being absolutely central to the way we order our society. If you believe that people are prone toward sin and bad behavior, well, you're interested in controlling them and minimizing the damage you assume they're going to be doing if they're not contained. But if you believe that people are born trailing clouds of glory, you see them as having been corrupted when they do terrible things, and you tend to identify multiple causes for their behavior: neglect, emotional trauma, environmental causes. I read an article yesterday, as we think about the marathon, about Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who was one of the two brothers who committed that terrible terrorist attack. And I read that he's going to a supermax prison to serve his life sentence. Well, I read about what happens in a supermax prison, and I thought it was devastating news. I don't see any reason whatsoever to slowly drive any human being insane in such a torturous environment. And you know what? It's not because I have all this compassion for Tsarnaev. I don't. I have limited compassion, okay? Maybe, it depends when you talk to me. Probably, none most days, because we are accountable for our actions. But I have a very practical belief that every thinking person is capable of growth and change, and that it absolutely does not serve the common good in any way to put someone in a cage forever to prevent that from happening. I guess I'm more of a universalist than I thought. I've been remembering a 2011 film called, you won't believe this, but it's true, it's called We Have to Talk About Kevin. And yeah, I know, and here's our little baby Kevin, who we just blessed this morning. So anyway, this child Kevin seems to have come out of the womb nasty. destructive and resentful. There's nothing biologically wrong with him. There's no physiological reason that he's nonverbal, unresponsive, and malevolent. There's this really disturbing scene where he's 3 years old and he messes his diaper just moments after his mother has changed it. His very frustrated mother. Like a little demon, he smiles wickedly at her, and you know exactly what he's doing. The mother, Eva, totally loses it, and she throws him across the room, breaking his arm. I imagine that many parents have wanted to do exactly the same thing at times. That's the secret about parenting that we need to be more open about. Because no one ever says this out loud, but it's true that children can appear at times to have a little streak of evil in them. You can see them learning how to push our buttons. You can see it if you observe children that they actually have to learn how to be human through a process. They figure it out. Well, what happens to Kevin in this movie is that he doesn't figure it out ever. He has 2 loving parents, a fine education, an adoring little sister, and economic privilege. But he never outgrows his malevolent beginnings. He has a violent nature and a malice and a talent for archery, which he uses to horrific ends. And he winds up ruining all the lives around him. So it's really hard to think of this kid, a psychopath, as having come trailing clouds of glory from God, who is his home, because he seems to have come from the depths of hell and to remain there. But here's what ticked me off about this story. The explanation given for Kevin's hateful nature in We Have to Talk About Kevin, which was a book before it was a film, is that his mother was much happier before she got pregnant and was deeply ambivalent about bringing him into the world. The film shows her in flashback, deliriously happy and free, a travel writer, New York City, kind of hipster, bohemian, before being tethered to a marriage, child, and enormous home in the suburbs. It's a really unfair and nasty guilt trip message to send to the many women who have felt similar ambivalence about having a baby, or for whom the maternal instinct didn't ever kick in with the tender depth that they had hoped for. In this film, though, the consequences of that in utero experience of maternal ambivalence is that the kid becomes a psychopath. And that is so unfair to mothers, you know? And the whole time I was watching this nightmare unfold, I was thinking, and I'm wondering, where's the community? Who are these people's community? Because ultimately it isn't one parent or even 2 parents, no matter how loving, who are going to fully recognize any child's gifts or fully recognize their flaws. They're too close to the caregiving. They're too prone to rejection, too exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed by the constant demands of parenting to prepare the little one to be a human among other humans. The whole time the terrible denouement in We Have to Talk About Kevin was building, I was thinking, do these people have anyone but each other to talk to? Dad's kind of clueless. Mom is frantic and freaked out. Well, where are their close friends? Where's their community? Where's the intervention that could have happened at some point where someone with the whole family's interests at heart could have said, you know what, Eva, and I don't remember what the husband's name is, we need to talk about Kevin. We need to talk about your family. You all are suffering. And he's acting out and showing some really disturbing behaviors. Why don't we make a time and meet and we'll find out what's going on and we'll see if we can get you all some help. Where was the place or community to which either of these parents or kids could speak their truth, in which they could be heard in confidence? In the end, we will probably never be able to identify quite exactly all of the factors that make each human being the complex combination that we are. Some are undoubtedly born wise and pure souls and maintain that beauty until they die, bless their hearts, regardless of circumstance. Others were born in a little touch of evil and must be tutored early in accountability and consequence, and almost trained out of their instincts, which are to harm and to divide. Most of us are a combination of all of those things. Streak of meanness and layers of goodness, all complicated by life experience and environment. But however we arrive, whatever face we had before we were born, we here affirm that there was at no point in the history of the human species one event or any pre-existing cause that lumps us all together as members of an inherently sinful or permanently blessed species. We here understand and affirm that the process of becoming human is a group process. How wonderful it is to be given the opportunity yet again to welcome a new child among us who reminds us of this group process and our place in it, who will be every bit as much our guide on the path of original blessing as we hope to be on his. Amen.